The program is about to begin. Please take your seats.
No commercial and no political interest should stand in the way of the truth. That would be the antithesis of all that I stood for in journalism.
That was Harry's greatest achievement, I think, to change British law in favour of press freedom, in favour, give more power to the powerless.
If the task of editing is to be anything, it is to edit text. If it's to sign expense sheets, I don't want to do it.
Welcome, everyone. The third annual Truth Tellers Summit is here, and on behalf of me and my co-hosts, Alessandra Galloni, Reuters editor-in-chief, and Karen O'Brien, Vice Chancellor of Durham University, we're thrilled that you're all here. As I watch that film of Harry's remarkable career, I do feel we've never needed him more. Harry once said that freedom of the press is a moral concept, or it is nothing. I know that we're all here today because you too share that view. On Sunday, I went to St. Bride's Church, that secluded jewel on Fleet Street built by Christopher Wren and rebuilt in the 50s when it was bombed in the Blitz. It was journalists who paid to have St. Bride's restored because the church has long served as their spiritual home. And now it's Harry's, with a new plaque in his name that went up a few months ago on a pew near the entrance. In Harry's memoir, My Paper Chase, he describes his childhood experience of accompanying his father on the beach at Rhyl as he talked to some of the shell-shot survivors of Dunkirk evacuated to the British coast. The stories of these shattered men were so very different from the jingoistic headlines that Harry'd seen, saying things like, "Bloody marvellous," on the front page of the Daily Mirror. It was that dissonance that set him on his lifelong quest to discern the difference between the truth and the official version. Only 2 years later, when my ambitions to be a newspaper reporter flowered, he wrote, did I understand that Dad was doing what a good reporter would do, asking questions, listening. Since we gathered for Truth Tellers last year, we've arrived at a place that we never expected to be. Truth Tellers has always featured so many journalistic heroes determined to get the story out in the face of enormous opposition or institutional cowardice or threadbare access to funds. And you're going to hear from a lot of them today, many of them in exile, who are forced to report from here. But will the coffee shops of London soon start to fill with American reporters and journalists forced to do their work far from the legal arm of Trump? In his first 100 days as president, Trump has gone for the journalistic jugular. And when the press needs to be at its most strong, the underpinnings are at its most weak. We're seeing the consequences of the twin evils of 2 decades of predatory digital content theft and corporate ownership that is so bedeviled by conflicts of interest that they're proving how little pressure it takes to throw their media assets under the bus if there's a business deal in jeopardy. That's what was so remarkable about Lord Thompson, owner of the Sunday Times, when Harry was the editor. Many people forget that when Harry fought the Distillers Company in the thalidomide campaign, they were the biggest advertisers in the Sunday Times. It's, unthinkable really today. And his grandson, Thomson Reuters chairman David Thompson, with his CEO Stephen Hasker, keeps that ethos alive at Reuters and has been so generous in paying forward Harry's legacy. Thank you, David, wherever you are over there, for both your support and your integrity. I also want to salute the Postcode Lottery Group, led by Sigrid Van Aken, a true friend of the press who gives her considerable support to multiple truth seekers in the world of serious reporters and journalists. And thank you also to the Sigrid Rousing Foundation, the Ford Foundation, Sir Howard Stringer, and to Andy Lack, and BBC News and James Harding with his newly relaunched Observer for their committed support. Today's summit reverberates with powerful voices, And I'm honored to be sitting down today with the courageous and luminous Yulia Navalnaya, widow of the slain opposition leader Alexei. And she's now leading that opposition to Putin. To the end of Harry's life, he never stopped playing his lifelong role as the tribal chief of reporters, photojournalists, and news editors, whose incentive is not money, whose passion is not power, but whose vocation is to find out what really happened, who was to blame, and how do we stop it from happening again. This is the core value behind the founding of this summit, to remind the world that truth never gets old. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, how are you? Thank you, Tina. So last year at Reuters, a team of journalists from around the world showed that making fentanyl, the drug that has killed around 450,000 people in America, is remarkably easy. We bought the ingredients from China, and we studied the cuisines of fentanyl cooks in Mexico. And for just $3,600, we bought enough ingredients and equipment to make around $3 million of the deadly drug. It was all legal, and it was all virtually unchecked by US border officials. Our investigation, which won the Pulitzer Prize for Investigative Journalism this week, has since helped shape politics and policy in Beijing and Washington. Chinese officials have begun to crack down on the sale of these so-called fentanyl precursors, and both the Biden and Trump administrations have moved to eliminate the trade loophole that allows the material to enter the US. Later today, you're also going to hear from some colleagues who spent the past 2 years working on the most comprehensive examination of the illicit activity on the secretive, porn-driven platform OnlyFans. Drawing on 6 years of police and court complaints in the US and the UK and elsewhere, the journalists appended OnlyFans' claims that it is building the world's safest social media platform and empowering its content creators. Instead, their investigation revealed that there are hundreds of cases of non-consensual porn, at least, including those of women who said they'd been sexually enslaved, and including horrific videos of children, including toddlers, appearing on OnlyFans. Both investigations, as you can imagine, were physically and emotionally dangerous. They were legally sensitive, and they were extremely difficult to pull off. The deepest admiration goes to our journalists who never gave up. But investigative journalism is a collective game, and so credit also goes to the host of editors, to fact-checkers, lawyers, and of course, trusting sources without whom our stories would not have existed. And of course, to our owners. Tina mentioned him, our owners, in the power that investigative journalism can drive change and hold those in power to account. As Tina said, in the US, it's becoming harder for journalists who are pursuing the truth. Just a few days ago, the Justice Department cracked down on leaks to news media by giving prosecutors the authority to use subpoenas, court orders, and search warrants. Even language, including that language which celebrates the diversity of our newsrooms that we have been pursuing for years and that is so important to what we do, even that is being weaponized. But these methods are actually well-worn playbooks of governments around the world in countries such as Afghanistan, Russia, India, Venezuela, where many of the journalists that you're going to hear from today have operated bravely and successfully for years. May their work be a guide for colleagues in the US for whom our trade has now become a little more challenging. In our newsroom, for a decade before his death, Harry Evans was our editor-at-large, a master muckraker of modern times, guiding our journalists, guiding them to dig harder, to seek further. And every year at this summit, I pledge that we, Reuters, will continue the cutting-edge investigative and public interest journalism of the kind that Harry pioneered. And this year is absolutely no different. and I hope you all feel the same. Thank you, and over to Karen.
This is the third year in a row I have had the honour of welcoming delegates to our Truth Tellers Summit in memory of Durham University alumnus and all-time great Harry Evans. On previous occasions, I have characterised the relationship between academia and investigative journalism as one of truth keepers and truth tellers, and I have depicted universities as a solid leg holding up the stool of civil society alongside the journalists who jointly bear that weight. But as I stand here, I am acutely aware that in many parts of the world, and now so visibly in the US, that leg is being kicked out from under us. Higher education is under attack, whether by means of lawfare, regulation-fare, or vindictive defunding. Over 650 US college and university presidents have written to President Trump to ask for a constructive engagement and respect for, in their words, their pursuit of truth without fear of retribution, censorship, or deportation. To no avail. Yesterday, Education Secretary Linda McMahon posted a letter accusing Harvard of disastrous mismanagement and doubling down on her threat of drastic funding cuts. Amid our defiance and indignation as a global sector, we do nevertheless have to ask ourselves how we got here, and how can we learn from other civil society actors like the media sector. As higher education institutions, we are many of us part of a prestige economy reliant on scarcity value and inclined to compete as often as we cooperate. We have long been deeply engaged with questions of global justice and social inclusion, but we have too often talked to ourselves in an idiom that many do not share or fully understand. We have much to learn from this Truth Tellers community with its vibrant spirit of common purpose, mutual support, and constantly adaptive quest for audiences meaningfully engaged in new ways. Harry asked the question, "Do I make myself clear?" in a book of the same title. If we have not done so sufficiently now, this is the time for the world's responsible and courageous truth seekers to make ourselves clear and heard. So let's begin.
If you read what's out of the New York Times, it's such a dishonest newspaper. It's such garbage. Let's hear the question from this very low-rated anchor at CBE.
Thank you, President. A select group of DC-based journalists should no longer have a monopoly over the privilege of press access at the White House.
This is going to be great television, I will say that.
The executive producer of CBS News' 60 Minutes, resigning from the long-running Sunday news program, saying that he has lost his journalistic independence.
Very good morning to you. Hi, good morning. My name's John Sopel. I co-host the News Agents podcast. With me, four absolute titans of the journalism industry. Joe Kahn, who's the executive editor of the New York Times, which picked up just the 4 Pulitzer Prizes in the past few days. Congratulations on that. Ali, who you've just met and heard from, Anand Giridharadas, who runs the hugely successful newsletter The Ink, and last but not least, Brian Stelter from CNN, who kept me sane all the years that I was living in America and making sense of the media landscape for me. And Brian, if I can start with you, Trump 1.0, I felt that the media often either set itself up as the chief cheerleader for Trump or the opposition to Donald Trump. And as a sort of BBC journalist at the time, I kind of thought, oh, this is very uncomfortable, hearing news anchors calling Trump a disgrace and an embarrassment and all the rest of it. But this time round, it feels a very different landscape with a lot of media companies looking like they're trying to sue for peace with Donald Trump, and Donald Trump even more aggressive.
In part, it's because the audience has changed. The audience fragmenting in ways that had not happened 10 years ago. That's partly because of Trump's attack. Oh, that's good. There we go. Okay, we'll try that again. I was starting to talk about the audience. Yes, we'll talk about the press fighting or folding. But the audience has changed in ways that weren't true 10 years ago. Donald Trump's lies about the media have seeped into the minds and the hearts of tens of millions of people, right? And they've opted out of what we consider legacy media. At the same time, there are many liberals, progressives, anti-Trump Republicans who are ticked off at the press right now for other reasons. There are all of those sorts of emotions and reactions to news coverage that I think are affecting the dialogue we're about to have. The word fight makes me uncomfortable inherently, right? We're talking about fight or fold. I don't view myself as a fighter. I don't think most reporters who are covering politics or media think they're in the middle of a fight. And yet, as Marty Baron famously said, we're not at war, we're at work. If one side's at war and the other side is not at war, the other side loses, right? A pacifist always loses in a war. And so there is this incredibly difficult dynamic the press is in, because this time it's not just words from Trump, it's actions. And so I wrote down two thoughts to start the conversation while I was watching that video. The first was that sometimes fighting and folding are happening in the very same place. At CBS right now, some are fighting, others are folding. It's happening in the exact same house. And number two, for every outlet that does fold, others are going to fight. In fact, sometimes when you fold, some of those folks leave, they cross the street, and they start fighting somewhere else. And they launch their own startups and Substacks and new operations. That is the big difference, I think, from 2017 from the first time around.
Just follow up on that very briefly. The thing that sort of struck me was, 2017 people were taking the knee. It feels like now they're bending the knee. Do you think that characterization is oversimplistic in the sense that you hear about what's happening at 60 Minutes, the kind of ABC suing for peace over a very contentious, libel case that Donald Trump brought, etc.
I think it's overly simplistic because 60 Minutes is publishing award-winning journalism every Sunday, including about the Trump administration. The work is still being done, although there are some owners, not all owners, some owners who are trying to figure out a path forward that seems like appeasement. Look, I've also had other media CEOs comment that Jeff Bezos is going to regret showing up to the inauguration. I think it all started with that Trump-ABC settlement on December 14th. That was the tell. That's where we were heading. But even Disney's ABC is out there every day trying to cover the Trump administration. And Terry Moran interrogated the president last week in the Oval Office. So the work is being done. Is it reaching the audiences it should reach? I think that's a different question.
Okay, well, and we're going to come to Terry Moran in just a minute. But Joe, let me come to you. What about the pressures at the New York Times? Do you feel it's very different this time round from last time? Because no one could accuse the New York Times of being one of those who are kind of, bending the knee, of kind of collapsing under the pressure of Donald Trump.
Yeah, the pressures are, some of the pressures are what was described earlier from the Justice Department seeking pretty actively to erode the freedoms for the media to do its job, essentially, and put individual reporters under threat, and potentially to remove kind of legal barriers to including reporters in investigations. Those are real, and they happen to good reporters on the job regardless of the stance of their owners. There's also, of course, as you were talking about, the sort of, the sense of kind of accommodation or even capitulation by some owners. You put those things together, and it is a tougher environment than it was 10 years ago at the dawn of Donald Trump. Yes.
Do you feel those pressures?
The New York Times is in a particularly advantageous position at the moment, to be honest. We always talk about the word independence We're an independent media organization. There are many independent media organizations, but we are genuinely independent. We don't have a parent company that has extended interest, that needs M&A approval, that needs broadcast regulatory approval. We don't have billionaire owners with lots of other interests that Donald Trump might find a way to interfere with. We don't get any revenue from the government, literally no revenue from the government. We don't get any advertising revenue. We no longer, under Donald Trump, get $1 of subscription revenue directly from government agencies. We get nothing. So they have no levers to pull on us, and we have family ownership that is determined to pursue the mission of the newsroom as its first and foremost duty of a family trust. We're in a very advantageous position institutionally.
I just want to follow up very briefly on the psychodrama with Donald Trump, because for all that he rails and rants at the New York Times, he loves you and seeks your approval the whole time. And there was the famous A.G. Sulzberger dinner that he had in the first term with Trump, where he was just saying, can't you be nice to me? Why can't you like me?
Why can't I get one good article in my hometown newspaper? Yeah. Which of course, there are many articles, and some of which actually he likes, and if you have the chance to visit Mar-a-Lago, you will see the New York Times